The Great Depression was the worst economic downturn in modern history. People went from parties, jazz, music, and riches in the roaring 20s to losing their life savings and standing in bread lines in the span of a few years. And the Depression wasn't just in America. Its impact spread across the world and ultimately led to the start of World War II. But what exactly caused the Depression, and what lessons can we learn from it? Let's start in 1918. World War I has just ended and American soldiers are returning home having won the war. It feels good to be back. During the war, women had for the first time begun to enter the workforce, and with men returning now, the economy saw a post-war boom. This economic boom, alongside a growing culture change, created the era known as the Roaring Twenties. At this time, in Detroit, Michigan, a man named Henry Ford would revolutionize transportation with the Ford Model T car. Facing huge demand for the car, his company introduced the process of the moving assembly line. This mass production dropped the car's price from $780 in 1910 to $290 in 1924, making it the first inexpensive car for the mass. By 1927, the 15 millionth Model T would roll out of the factory. You'll get a car. You'll get a car. Everyone gets a car. Many companies would copy this assembly line process to mass produce other inventions, including the radio, washing machine, and vacuum. With mass production of new products and improved advertising using the radio, the age of consumerism had officially begun. Everyone wanted the latest and greatest new product. To help with the demand, banks began giving out loans more freely to people so that they could buy these new products on credit with money they didn't yet have. Times were good, people were partying, there was jazz music and a spirit of social liberation. Good to see you at the party, old sport. Prohibition had started in 1920, but meant little to this new generation. The parties were bigger, the morals were looser, and Wall Street became the place to be. From 1921 to 1929, the U.S. stock market increased driven by the post-war boom, easy credit, and all the demand for new consumer products. As the public learned about these incredible returns from the stock market, everyone began putting money in and talking about it more. This created a snowball effect, whereas the stock market continued to go up. People began to blindly sink all their savings into stocks, and some even took out loans, which further drove prices up. When people believe no price is too high for a stock, that can be a warning sign that the price is no longer based on fundamentals and may have been driven up to irrational levels. Although stock prices were reaching new highs, something wasn't right. By the mid-1920s, the economy and demand for products had slowed drastically. With Europe still recovering from the aftermath of World War I, and few countries being able to afford the new consumer items, global trade was stalling. This didn't matter, as people were still overwhelmingly optimistic and expected the stock market would continue to see record yearly performances each year. Extreme greed and unrealistic fantasy filled the air. With margin, people could even buy stocks for only 40 to 10% of the actual stock price and then pay off their loan when the stock sold for large profits. I would like to take out a loan. Sure. What for? A house? A business? A farm? To be stocks? Fine by me. Here you go. By 1929, 40% of U.S. consumer debt was being used to purchase stocks. And in that same year, the U.S. had just elected a new president, Herbert Hoover, who famously said, "We in America today are near to the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of any land. The poorhouse is vanishing from among us. Too many people, a skyrocketing stock market was a sign of a healthy, booming economy. But things were about to take a dark turn. Catastrophe would hit. On October 24th, 1929, a day that became known as Black Thursday. The stock market would see heavy liquidation, with a record 12.9 million shares sold, and the entire stock market fell 11%. This day marked the beginning of the Great Depression, and the following week there would be Black Tuesday, where the market fell 12%, with a record-breaking 16.4 million shares sold. Eventually, in the span of 2 weeks, stocks had lost about a third of their value. People who had borrowed money to invest were crushed, and many people lost their life savings. However, the worst was yet to come. The common belief is that the stock market crash caused the Great Depression, but this is not entirely true. The stock market triggered a recession, but the real cause of the Great Depression was that many banks had extended to many bad loans and were speculating too much. At this time, many U.S. banks were small and independent shops that lent out a large amount of their assets to people for stock market speculation. As the stock market crashed, these banks went out of business overnight. There was no deposit insurance at the time, so if a local bank closed its doors, people lost their money. With headlines of many banks shutting down, people began to panic and pull their savings from healthy banks. This created bank runs on otherwise healthy banks that had to turn around and try to get all their customers' money all at once. This became a serious problem when in New York City, a false rumor started that the Bank of the United States refused to sell a man's stock. This was enough to cause over 25,000 people to crowd the bank, and by the end of the day, $3 million had been withdrawn from the bank. Fear was in the air, and worried of a larger bank run they couldn't handle, the Bank of the United States closed its doors and asked the state to take over the bank as assets. Soon after, the bank failed to get support for a short-term loan to stop the bank run and would ultimately close its doors for good. It accounted for a third of the total $550 million deposits lost in the Depression. This sent shockwaves across the banking industry, and many banks began to call in loans and sell assets in order to stay liquid. 1/3 of banks in America would ultimately fail in this time period. Hey Joe, I just sold my car and have a few bucks now to pay you back. Which bank are you with again? Are you crazy? Not a chance. I'm leaving my money in any of those banks. Again, with people choosing to hold their money outside of banks, the money supply in the U.S. declined 31% from 1929 to 1933. And deflation has devastating effects on an economy by causing the value of money to go up. It reduces consumers' willingness to spend money, discourages investment, and increases the burden for those in debt. All of this leads to wages and income falling. And through this all, the Federal Reserve stood back, allowing this money supply contraction and the banking failures to happen without any intervention. A crucial mistake that has been widely criticized for making the Depression much worse than it needed to be. Through all of this, U.S. President Herbert Hoover had no idea how to fix this and would largely be blamed for the lasting duration of the Depression. Following the initial stock market crash, there was a growing sentiment for isolationist and protectionist policies. In 1930, he passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act to protect U.S. farmers and other industries from foreign competitors. It increased tariffs on foreign imports to the U.S. by about 20%, which then immediately led to 25 countries retaliating and putting their own tariffs on American goods. Global trade would plummet even further from this, declining 66% worldwide from 1929 to 1934. Global trade was a relatively small piece of the American economy at the time, but this policy only made things worse. In total, the Great Depression would last over 10 years and mark the worst economic downturn in the history of the modern world. The Dow Jones would fall 90% from its high in 1929, and many lost their jobs as companies shut down en masse. 9 million savings accounts were wiped out. Over 9,000 U.S. banks had failed. Industry halted, and unemployment in the U.S. reached 24.9%, its highest point in history. To make matters worse, there was a period of severe dust storms in the middle of the U.S. that caused droughts, high winds, and hurt many farms in what became known as the Dust Bowl, the worst man-made ecological disaster in American history. As farming in the U.S. slowed down and with 1/3 of Americans still in agriculture, this would have massive consequences. Homelessness and breadlines became a common sight. In America, there would be 34 million people without any income. Shantytowns began appearing across the country and got the nickname Hoovervilles after the now disgraced president. Could it get any worse? In 1932, the U.S. elected President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who promised drastic changes in action to get the country out of the Depression. With the New Deal program for helping the needy, he established a minimum wage, overtime pay, unemployment insurance, and a social security program. As for major banking reforms, he enacted federal deposit insurance on bank deposits to help prevent bank runs. And he also added the Securities and Exchange Commission for better reporting and scrutiny on public companies. FDR's New Deal programs helped to stabilize the banking industry and restore the public's confidence. However, it would still take several years for the U.S. economy to fully bounce back, with other countries around the world having also suffered from the Great Depression. This led to the rise of extremist governance, and World War II would begin just a few years later in 1939. It was until the start of World War II in 1939 that the Great Depression truly ended. It was only at this time that the unemployment rate fell below 10%, and the U.S. saw vast stimulus to support war efforts. Economists still argue how much intervention is needed to solve an economic disaster and the effect of the New Deal program. Many of the lessons learned from the Great Depression are still used in the modern day, including the need for a small, stable amount of inflation to boost consumer spending and business investment, an increased role in government spending, and the assistance from the government to boost the economy when a recession occurs. By learning from the past, we can better understand our current economic system and see any potential dangerous parallels in the future. In the end, it was greed that drove people to believe that there was no price too high for a stock and made many banks take on bad lives. And just like all bubbles, an overinflated market always sees the same ending of a painful crash.